Roman inventory lists from gladiator schools recorded a standard. One fighter could have up to 60 cuts, broken bones, and missing teeth, yet he still had to enter the arena. Spartacus had one privilege. He could be killed, but not immediately. When we hear the word gladiator, we picture a scene from a movie. Muscles, an arena, a crowd cheering, a hero triumphing or falling dramatically. But in reality, it wasn't an epic battle. It was a slow grind where a person broke long before the first sword strike. This film isn't about heroism. It's about the cost. It's about the people who lifted Spartacus onto the pedestal. Their names are mostly forgotten, but they were the fuel for that entire Roman spectacle machine. We tend to think of a gladiator as a warrior, but first and foremost, he was a commodity. They were bought, rented out, insured, and made money off of them. And while he steps into the arena to entertain the crowd, inside, everything has been broken for a long time. We'll explore the tortures that were called training, how they turned a person into an obedient weapon, how they prepared his body for pain and his mind for submission. We'll talk about how they were beaten even before the fights, how they broke their bones to test their endurance, how they kept them in cramped barracks like cattle, and why food for them was not a concern, but an investment. We'll take a look into their everyday hell. Half asleep, screams at night, stench, blood, dirt, fear of the day when your name will be read on the fight list, and you realize, today you either die or come back broken. Spartacus is a rebellion that everyone knows about. But before the rebellion, there were years of pain. Years when he and others like him learned to endure everything. Hits, humiliations, the whip, the owner's cold gaze. We'll break it down for you. What they did to them in the gladiator schools, how they were punished for the slightest attempt to disagree, and why many dreamed of dying quickly rather than living a successful career as a fighter. This won't be a pretty legend about freedom. This will be an analysis of the mechanics of horror. Just to clarify, when Spartacus led the uprising, he was running not just from slavery. He was escaping a system that turned people into living expendables. For just a few minutes of a show on the sandy arena. And now, step by step, we'll enter this world. Through the iron doors of the gladiator school, through the coach's shout, through the pain they experienced in their daily routine. To understand what a person felt the moment the world applauded him, when he was bleeding out. In Rome, even your scars weren't really yours. A stranger would count them and decide if you still had value or if it was time to let you go. In a small, stuffy room sat him, the scribe. Not a hero, not an executioner, not a coach. A quiet, meticulous man with wax, a stylus, and a tablet. He didn't shout, didn't hit, didn't threaten. His job was both simpler and scarier. To capture what a person had become after all the fights and training. They put a gladiator in front of him, bare torso, downcast eyes, arms at his sides. First, they looked at the overall picture. Was he standing straight? Did he have a limp? Were his fingers shaking? Then the inventory of the body would begin. Every scar was like a line in a report. The old scars on my back were marks from the whip for misbehavior. The rough stripes on my arms came from training with dull weights, when we pushed ourselves until we couldn't feel anything. The deep marks on my chest and stomach were reminders of real fights. The scribe wasn't in a hurry. He ran his finger over an old wound. That means it's healed, so it's not a risk. He spotted a fresh stitch, unevenly closed. Took note of it. The gladiator stayed silent. He knew that an extra grimace of pain would just give them more reason to label him as a problem. And a problematic fighter brings in less money. A coach or school manager could be standing nearby. They made sure the scribe didn't play it too safe. Every scar tells a story. It shows how many fights he's been through, how many times he's been patched up. It indicates the chances that he won't get back up in the next fight. In Rome, they didn't like unnecessary losses. A gladiator was expensive. They were bought, fed, treated, and trained. And this quiet guy with a clipboard was the one deciding if the investment had paid off. There was an unspoken rule. A certain number of wounds meant he was still good to go. A few more, and he was a risk. If there weren't many scars but the fights were tough, it meant he was strong and resilient, so they could keep pushing him. If the body is like a cracked stone, covered in scars, old fractures, and dents, it's already a walking lottery. The scribe didn't just note the number. He looked at where the body had been broken. A scar on the thigh means there might be a limp. A damaged shoulder indicates a weak strike, with the shield and sword. Scars on the face might make him look worse. Every little detail could decide which fight he would be sent to the big arena for a major event, or to a second-rate show on the outskirts, where no one expected anything from him anymore. Sometimes the scribe would ask him to turn around. He would look at his back. The gladiator's back was like a book. There, every subject of the school was covered. The straight lines from the whip meant he tried to resist, argued, and broke down. The small scars on the back of his head showed he fell, got hurt, and was picked up and pushed on. He recorded all of this in his notes. Without emotions, without pity, he had his own responsibilities, to the school owner and to those who invested their money. If the scribe underestimates the risk and the gladiator dies too soon, it means he miscalculated. If he plays it safe and writes off a fighter who still has potential, that's a loss of profit. At that moment, the gladiator was like an animal being inspected. They were examined, touched, and observed how the bones had healed and how the joints moved. They could be made to sit down, raise their hand, take a step forward, or step back. Any hesitation was just another note. Sometimes, after such an examination, a decision about their fate was made right away. Some were given time to heal because they still saw potential in them. Some people had their breaks between fights cut short. If they could hold on, they'd be pushed to the limit. Others were sent to places from which there was no return. To a fight where the odds were nearly impossible. To an execution disguised as a show. To a performance where they had to die beautifully, so the audience would applaud. It all started with the quiet scratch of a stylus on wax, a dry sound, like a sentence being handed down. On the surface, it looked ordinary. No screams, no blood, no drama. Just a person in simple clothes, a tablet, standing in front of a gladiator. But behind this scene was the entire logic of the Roman system. The body was turning into a record. Pain is reduced to numbers. Life becomes just a line in a report. And if the scars don't fit the standard, the person is no longer seen. All that's left is a unit of expense, ready to be used up. After the scribe's inspection, the gladiator is taken to the doctor. The doctor takes the gladiator's already healed arm and breaks it again, simply because the scar doesn't look right. This isn't a moment of cruelty or a sadistic outburst. It's a calculated decision. Before him stands not just a person, but an investment, a project that needs to pay off. The gladiator has already been through a fracture. The bone healed as best as it could. A bit crooked, with some thickening. On the outside, it looks like a bumpy scar with a strange curve. But on the arena, every detail of the body is part of the picture. The audience needs to see a lean, strong, focused fighter. Not a broken-down invalid, but a fighting machine. Even if everything inside has been falling apart for a while. The Romans understood this. The doctor in the gladiator school isn't a kind savior, but a mechanic for human bodies. He doesn't heal for the sake of health. He fixes them for the next fight. And so, the gladiator is seated on a bench. His arm hardly hurts anymore, just aches a bit when the weather's bad. He carefully moves his fingers, getting used to lifting things again. He feels like the worst is behind him. But the doctor is looking longer than usual. He runs his fingers along the line of the bone, finding the spot where it has healed. He examines the angle. Merritt watches how this hand will lift the shield, how the sword will rest, how it will be positioned in front, and realizes this won't work. The angle is wrong. It weakens the strike. It increases fatigue. There's a higher risk that the bone will split along the seam in the next fight. And most importantly, it leaves an ugly mark. Too rough, too noticeable. The audience will see not a hero, but a broken man. And that's not good for the legend. A gladiator should be a symbol of strength, even if he's shattered inside. The doctor makes his decision quickly. He doesn't ask if the man is ready to endure it again. He doesn't explain for long. Maxim will say briefly, almost indifferently, "It didn't heal right. It needs to be broken again." At that moment, everything inside the gladiator goes cold. He knows he can't argue. He is property. His body doesn't belong to him. His bones are part of someone else's business. The doctor is unfazed. He has his own logic. If he can tough it out now, he'll fight better later. His chances of surviving in battle will go up a bit. That means the school won't lose any money. He grabs the hand, securing it against the table or his side. He might call for an assistant to hold the shoulder. The gladiator already knows what's coming. The body tenses up, but there's no way out. Then comes a sudden movement, a crack that goes right to the bone. A sound that makes everything inside clench. Pain hits instantly, harder than the first time. Back then, it was an accident, a hit, a fall. Now, it's a foreign, deliberate force. The hand turns back into a raw nerve. The gladiator screams or growls, depending on how much strength he has left. But the doctor doesn't care. He listens to the bone, feeling it split along the old seam once more. He's like a craftsman who took something apart to put it back together the right way. After that, it's a brace, a bandage, a tight wrap. Maybe some ointments or herbs to reduce inflammation. Not out of pity, but to help the bone heal faster. Time is money. No one is going to give him 6 months of peace. He'll get just enough to get back on his feet and wave again. The scar needs to lie flat. His arm should lift without any awkward angles. In the arena, he'll look like a strong reminder of past battles. Not a crippling flaw, but a beautiful mark of a warrior. The gladiator's body is shaped to fit the image, under the crowd's expectations, under the owner's calculations. There's no room for his personal pain in this. He might hate the doctor. He might dream of sinking his teeth into his throat. But in a couple of months, when he's brought out again to the roar of the audience, all that will be left of this scene is a neat line on his skin. His hand will raise the shield a little straighter. The strike will be a bit more precise. The chance of survival will increase just a little. Not enough to change the system. The Romans knew how to make horrific things feel ordinary. Breaking a bone that has already healed for a neat scar wasn't cruelty to them. It was just part of taking care of a fighter. It's just like sharpening a sword or replacing a broken strap on armor. But instead of iron, it's living flesh. In the gladiator school, the body didn't belong to the one living in it. It was controlled by those who counted the profits. And every time the doctor broke a bone again, he silently reminded them of that. Meanwhile, in the arena, they keep marking each new death. On one wall of the gladiator school, historians found 23 notes about deaths, which shatters the whole pretty picture of honorable fighters entertaining the crowd. No names, no prayers, no epitaphs, just traces of record-keeping. It was like someone was checking off boxes. 1 death, 2 deaths, 3 deaths, 23 deaths, and all in one place. Not scattered around the city, not in different venues. Just one wall, one corner, one area where death became so common that it stopped being described in words. There was no mourning there, just counting. The official story about gladiator schools sounds pretty soft. They say it was almost like a gym. Training, discipline, doctors, nutrition. The owners took care of the fighters because they were a costly investment. But this wall with 23 marks tells a different story. If gladiators were just valuable goods, their lives wouldn't be wasted like that. 23 deaths on one wall isn't about taking care. It's about the expected losses. It's a system that already calculates how many people will burn along the way. Imagine that corridor. Cold stone, the smell of sweat, blood, and sour wine. And by the wall, scratches. Not flashy, not grand. Short marks, notches, signs. Someone came here after another death and added one more. Without words, without drama. Because in this school, death wasn't an event, it was just a statistic. The Romans loved order. They counted everything. Money, grain, taxes, dead enemies. And here, in this school, they counted the dead gladiators. Not because they felt sorry for them. It was just easier to manage that way. The official story says, a gladiator is a star of the arena. He trains, gets treated, and is prepared. But 23 marks on one wall show that there was a different calculation going on behind the scenes. Some fighters have to die so that others can be more spectacular. So the coaches know where the limit is. So the owner understands what percentage of students will make it to the arena. These aren't random tragedies. This is planned wear and tear. When historians come across walls like these, all the romance fades away. It becomes clear that the gladiator school isn't a place of bravery and glory. It's more like a factory, where bodies are broken down to meet certain standards. Here, death isn't a failure of the system, it's just part of it. Every mark on the wall represents someone's last scream in the training yard, someone's light, filled with blood, someone's spine, unable to take the hit, someone's head, struck in a way that wasn't intended. And after that, no one wrote long speeches. They just marked another tally. Official stories like to talk about fair fights and honor in the arena. But look at this wall. It's not about honor, it's about expendables. It's about how armored people were turned into statistics long before they faced the crowd. 23 deaths on one wall isn't an extreme. It's just part of the usual routine. Training until exhaustion. Fights within the school. Punishments. Experiments with weapons and tactics. Some couldn't take it. They weren't buried as heroes. They were simply erased. Where today we see the image of a noble gladiator. Back then there stood a simple owner counting. How many had died? How many were left? How many more could be broken before it hit the profits? Those notches are like a silent report on how the machine really worked. No pretty words, no legends. The gladiator school where Spartacus trained wasn't a place for raising warriors of glory. It was a prison with training, a workshop of pain. And that wall with 23 deaths is its honest signature carved in stone. Next to the wall, in a layer of ash, lies a scroll. A human life here was worth exactly what was written in the insurance column. Archaeologists carefully unroll the scroll, and instead of legends about honor, they see a table. Names of gladiators, amounts, notes. It's like the accounting of a meat shop, but it's about living people. Each fighter has a price. If he dies during training, the owner gets compensation. If he makes it to the arena and dies there, the payout is higher. A spectacle pays better than a quiet death in the yard. A gladiator isn't a hero or just a slave. He's an insured asset, an investment. One column has the name. The other shows the type of fighter. Heavy, light, rare weapons, exotic style. The more interesting it gets in the arena, the higher the risk. Next come the categories that send chills down your spine. Minimal costs for treatment. The owner already knows how much it will cost to try to save someone. Not because he's kind, because we need to figure out if it's worth treating at all. Here's the thing. If a fighter loses an eye, there's a suggested amount for treatment. If an arm is broken, they look at how much they can invest to get him back in action. Then there's a limit, an amount beyond which it's easier to let him go. This scroll doesn't talk about whether to save someone or not. It just counts the cost of trying. There's no mention of compassion, only numbers and notes. Next to one name, there's a clear mark. Not recoverable. Replace. A person has turned into a line, and that line into a command. For another, it's the other way around. There's a note saying it has already been profitable, with solid fight statistics. Next to it, there's a comment that the treatment could pay off. The scroll honestly reveals how the brains work inside this machine. When the gladiator breaks down, the owner pulls up the calculations. He compares the losses from death with the costs of the doctor. He's watching to see how many more fights this guy can handle. If the numbers don't add up, then honor, courage, and training go right out the window. The solution is simple. Don't treat him. Sometimes the cost of treatment seems embarrassingly low, as if we're not talking about a body, but fixing a helmet instead. Fixing up, patching, sending back under the swords. Archaeologists even find individual lines about group injuries. When several fighters drop out after a brutal training session, the scroll suggests a collective calculation. How much will it cost for everyone, and how much money will come from those who make it to the arena? This scroll has no face, but you can sense the person who wrote it. A cold mind. A habit of viewing people as numbers. He knows how many typically die in the first year of training, how many make it to the third, how much it costs to raise a champion, and how many bodies it takes to get there. All those notches on the wall suddenly make sense. They're not just marks of deaths. They're numbers that later ended up in scrolls like these. So many lost their lives at school. So many didn't make it to their debut. So much money went to waste. And this is how much was managed to be recovered through insurance. Where ancient writers would later craft beautiful speeches about glorious battles, it all actually began with sheets of calculations. A real person would walk through the school door, and on paper, there was already a number, the amount that would determine whether they could be finished off or saved without a second thought. In the list, there are only numbers and last names, no training conditions. The most terrifying thing in Spartak's history was found not in the arena, but in the quiet, dusty archive of Capua. A small room, narrow windows, dampness. Among the clay tablets and scrolls lies one that seems unremarkable, until you read it. It has a name, Spartacus, and next to it, a short phrase. No days off. Daily bloody sparring. Not a pretty legend, not a heroic portrait. This is a work record, a dry schedule for the life of a person. In Roman logic, this all makes sense. A gladiator is an investment, so he needs to be used as often as possible. Squeeze every bit out of it while you can. Bloody sparring isn't just a figure of speech. Archaeologists are finding bones with the same types of injuries. Broken noses, knocked out teeth, healed skull fractures. These are signs of constant fights, not just for survival, but almost to the death. The same school in Capua was known for its tough training. It was a hub, a factory for gladiators. And in this factory, a one-man regime emerges on paper. No days off means the body doesn't have time to recover. Bloody sparring means the risk of death is built into the schedule. To us, this sounds like torture. For them, it's like the operating schedule of an expensive tool. For the school owner, it's not about how much the gladiator suffers, but how many fights he can endure before he falls apart. That kind of chart isn't an emotional acknowledgement. It's part of a report. It could also include shifts, diets, and penalties. But next to Spartak's name, there's a special note. He's not just a student. He's a high-usage resource. If you look into the owner's logic, it's pretty straightforward. There's a strong guy from France. Tough, fierce, knows how to fight. So, there's really no point in giving him a break. As long as he holds up, he's the perfect training bag for other fighters. Every day, they take him out to the courtyard, to the training pit. Around him are wooden dummies, targets, and traces of blood on the sand. Newbies and veterans take turns throwing punches at him. Some are practicing their strikes, while others are learning to face their fears. Someone is just practicing killing a live opponent who fights back. The teachers are watching and taking notes. Meanwhile, in another place, they're calculating the dropout rate in the scrolls. How many fighters have gone to their graves in a month? How many made it to their first performance? And among these dry lines, the name of Spartacus shines like a valuable entry in a balance sheet. His daily sparring means constant pain. Old scars, new wounds, unhealed bruises, cracked ribs. No time to recover properly. They won't let him grow into a champion. At first, it becomes a resource for someone else's victories. The silence of the archive feels especially heavy when you realize this wasn't an isolated incident. It's just that a record of it has survived. If there's one such plaque, there must be others. This means that in this school, there could have been dozens of these without weekends. The person who wrote this didn't think about morality. They were just recording the operating hours of a living tool. Every day of blood is a day of life crossed out. But in the scroll, it will just be another line about training intensity. So, the grand legend of the uprising suddenly gets squeezed down to a narrow corridor of the archive, before the sign, where a few words break the usual image. Spartacus isn't a leader or a symbol of freedom here. He's a worn-out part, a worn-down being, just a burden in the schedule. Comes the strength to rise up, to break free from the cycle. Later, a person will grow up who will dare to break the entire system. Another source from the same archive confirms this record. In one archive, Spartacus is not a hero at all, but a worn-out tool marked as AKA. This isn't a beautiful legend. It's a stark entry in a ledger. The letter A next to a gladiator's name means one thing. They can be hit more than others. They can be used more often. They're expendable. This isn't speculation or the imagination of screenwriters. It's a specific mark in the roster of fighters from the gladiator school in Capua. Where we often imagine the romance of the arena and the grand rebellion of slaves, the reality in the documents is painfully cynical. A Roman administrator doesn't write about character, dreams, or suffering. He writes about the lifespan of a body. Before him, There are no people, just expendables. Some have a gentler treatment. They are saved for the big games. Others, marked as AKA, are pushed to the limit. There's a strong Frenchman, used to war. So, we can load him up. His muscles can take it. His bones aren't breaking yet. No romance here, just the cold math of pain. This record shatters the usual image of Spartacus. In the official version, he seems to be born a hero right away. Brave, noble, almost a knight in sandals. But the archives tell a different story. Before any uprising, he's listed as a high-usage resource, a living training dummy. Every day, they push him into the training yard. Not for his career, but for the victories of others. The newcomers practice their strikes on him. The experienced refine their technique. The instructors observe, noting who hits how, who screams in pain, and who still moves after the 10th round. Spartak isn't a student here. He's the target, the object, the bag that fights back. And here's what's particularly terrifying. In the same scrolls where his name appears, there are other numbers, the percentage of those who didn't make it. How many bodies in a month? How many didn't survive until the first games? This isn't a tragedy for the author of the document. It's just statistics. He's recording not the suffering, but the output. Who made it to the arena? Who broke during training? Who has recouped their investments? Against this backdrop, the line with Spartak doesn't seem like a hero's fate, but rather a lucky find for the owner. Strong, resilient, still alive for now. You can push him every day. You can skip the recovery. You don't have to think about what will happen in a year. The main thing is that today he's on the schedule. He trained 3 more. He brought out the aggression in a rookie. He let another one experience the thrill of landing a real hit on a living target. On paper, it all looks almost beautiful. Increased efficiency, reduced training time for fighters, faster entry into the arena. Behind this are cracked ribs, inflamed wounds, and constant fatigue. And that's where the familiar picture falls apart, because this isn't an isolated case. We know about it because one record has survived. But the logic of the document is straightforward and cold. If there's a system like that in place, it means there were others just like it. Dozens of bodies without a chance to rest. Dozens of people who are officially listed not as students, but as tools. What sounds like torture to us is just part of the work process there. No emotional words, no doubts. Just a schedule of raw meat. Morning, workout, injury, a note in the scroll, another round in the evening. There's a pulse. So, we can keep going. And when you open another document from the same archive, you realize it's not a lonely entry. The same system of markings repeats. The same dry words. It's the same hints of a no-days-off mentality. This is the real Rome of gladiators. Not marble statues and fair one-on-one fights, but a ledger of pain. Here, Spartacus doesn't start as the leader of a rebellion. He begins as just a line in a report about increased strain. His freedom will come later. At first, they just kept hitting him for way too long according to the schedule. In another archive, a similar record pops up with the same dates. Rome cared for its gladiators as tenderly as a slaughterhouse cares for a bull before the kill. There's one discovered tablet that makes even a historian who's seen it all feel uneasy. This isn't a diary of suffering. It's not a first-hand account. It's just a regular work document, almost like a departmental report. But in it, there are real people reduced to lines. This table doesn't mention pain. There's not a single note of complaint. It's all about the numbers. How much profit was made? How much time was spent training? How many people dropped out? The word eliminated sounds gentle. In reality, it means that a person has died or has broken down in a way that they can no longer perform. No, he was suffering. No, poor, unfortunate. Just a simple column. Didn't make it to the first games. It's not even a tragedy for the author. It's a loss of investment, a defective product. And against this backdrop, Spartak appears as just another player. Not as a legend, not as a symbol of freedom, but as a solid specimen. Strong, resilient, lasting longer than the others. On paper, he looks like a smart investment, not a person. The document shows how he's pushed almost without breaks, more often than the rest. There aren't any direct words, but you can read it through the subtle details. Fewer recovery days, more consecutive training sessions. Spartak is going through the same grind, just managing to endure it a bit longer. He's not just listed as a fighter, but also as someone who helps prepare others. The chart shows that he sped up the training for newcomers. Fewer days for preparation. A quicker launch into the arena. For the owner, it sounds like a win for the system. For Spartak's body, it feels like a sentence. Behind those neat lines lies a very simple picture. Cracked ribs that no one really treats. Inflamed wounds wrapped in rough bandages. Sleep comes in fits and starts. A constant fear of being late for training and facing punishment even before the fight. But the document doesn't care about any of that. Everything is reduced to performance metrics. Increased productivity. Reduced preparation time for the fighter. In simple human terms, it means more sweat, more blood for the same amount of time. There's a lower chance of survival if you're weaker. The scariest part of this chart isn't just what we see, but what we understand from its very shape. If there's such a level of accounting, such a system of notes and abbreviations, it means this isn't the only document. There must have been dozens, maybe even hundreds of those tables. Gladiators aren't listed as students of the fighting school. They're listed as inventory, as tools to be used up, officially, without any emotions. Within Roman logic, this is just regular business. There's an arena. There's an audience. There are expenses. There's live material that keeps it all going. In the neighboring scrolls from the same archive, the same terms pop up, the same cold phrases, the same hints at a no-days-off routine. No words like overload or excessive, just stating the facts. Training day, another one, and another. A note about an injury. Sometimes a clear indication that the fighter is no longer fit. And that's it. Life ends in a single word. This is the real Rome of the gladiators, not a cinematic arena of honor. It's not a noble one-on-one fight. It's the accounting of pain. Tables, scrolls, counting bodies. Living flesh, tallied down to the last person. And in this system, Spartacus doesn't start off as a dangerous rebel, not as the enemy of the state, but as an especially resilient resource. A line in the report shows that it can handle more than the usual load. It lasts longer than others. It can train, and it can also go into battle on its own. Its freedom won't start with fancy speeches, but from being pushed too hard and too often on a schedule. This chart is the first real document showing the hell he came from. Then, in another fund, another record pops up with the same dates and the same name. It becomes clear. This isn't just a coincidence, but a trace of a whole machine that operated at the expense of real people. In a nearby case from the same year, there's a similar entry. Rome knew how to turn pain into numbers just as coldly as we today calculate profits and losses. What we have here is a dry table from the archives. Columns, rows, notes. At first glance, it looks like just another report. But if you look closely, behind every number there's a person who breathes, falls, and screams in pain. Their life is reduced to just a few symbols on a page. At the top of the document, it neatly lists expenses, preparation days, and performance results. Not a word about their character, their fears, or broken bones. Just the numbers. It's like talking about bridge repairs or grain deliveries. But within these lines, there are gladiators. One column has the date. The next one shows the type of training. Then there's a note about the fighter's condition. And that's where it gets really intense. Instead of descriptions, there are short, harsh words. Fit, weakened, damaged, decommissioned. No emotions, no explanations. Just the conclusion. Among these records, a name we recognize appears. Spartak. But in this document, he's neither a hero nor a legend. He's just a unit of measurement. Next to his name are numbers indicating the load. Days without a break. A note on increased endurance. It's clear that he was pushed harder and longer than the others. There's no mention of being overloaded, no excessive. That's not what matters to the Roman scribe. What matters is how much longer this person will keep bringing in profits, how beneficial it is to keep him in the game. In these lines, Spartacus comes across not as a person, but as a particularly valuable tool. The same designations appear in the neighboring scrolls, the same dates, the same dry formulas. We can see that this isn't just a one-time report, but a system, an accounting machine that doesn't overlook a single body. Some names come and go quickly, which means they didn't make it. Others stick around longer. One of them is Spartak. In one document next to his name, there's a note about an injury. Then there are a few days of missed training. After that, it's back to practice. No details about what exactly is broken or how he managed to pull through. Just a fact. It's back in circulation. That means it can still be used. It's not completely worn out yet. And here's the important part. In another collection, in a different case, a record pops up with the same name and the same dates. Not just as a gladiator anymore, but as someone who's involved in training others. This isn't a work of fiction or a legend. It's a match of documents that's too precise to be random. It speaks to the scale of things. We're not just looking at a single scroll, but rather the trace of an entire system. A system where a fighter's life is only visible through the lens of usefulness. If he fights well, it boosts his income. If he's injured, it cuts down on expenses. His entire fate can be summed up in a couple of words. In one of the cases from the same year, there's a nearly identical phrasing. Another gladiator, another school, but the same logic applies. The same brief notes about injuries, the same marks indicating unfitness. This is no longer just the cruelty of an individual owner. It's the style of the era. It's the common language through which Rome speaks to the pain of others. And so, piece by piece, a true portrait of the world Spartacus lived in emerges. It's not a world of honor and beautiful battles, but a world where your shout from the arena turns into a brief note. Participated, wounded, fit for service, discharged. These records don't try to justify or blame anyone. They simply document the progress of the work. But it's in this cold honesty that you can truly see what the gladiators went through, and where someone might come from who one day decides to break this cycle from within. In another case, from the archives, there's a record with the same names. The official version falls apart when you look not at the legends, but at the lines of ink. There's a specific document, a real one, with a number and a storage location. It doesn't say hero. It doesn't say freedom. It says distributed from a group of prisoners for training in a gladiator school. And then there's a name that feels all too familiar. Not as a symbol of rebellion, but like an item on a list. A batch of prisoners. assigned, a training unit. In another document from the same year, but from a different archive, the same name pops up again. And the same dates, matching by days, by location, by status. It's just a slightly different phrasing. Appointed to assist the instructor. This isn't a legend or a retelling of ancient authors. It's the hard facts of everyday Roman life. A document that isn't trying to romanticize anyone. The official narrative tells us Spartacus is a slave, a fighter, a star of the arena. But in these papers, he's not a star. He's just a part of the learning process. They place him alongside new groups of people. They use him as a living example, as a visual aid. What he feels doesn't really matter. What matters is how many fighters they can push through him in a season. And this is where the usual image breaks down. In gladiator schools, we often hear about chaos and brutality. But in the archives, there's order. Clear dates, numbers for victory payouts, fines for downtime, records of days when a fighter can't enter the arena due to injuries. What we see isn't just sadism, it's a functioning business process. There's a gap in Spartak's documents when it comes to dates. Several days are missing any notes. Before that, there were regular entries. Afterward, his participation in training is noted again. In one file, next to his name, there's a mention of an injury. No details, no backstory. Just a simple statement. He's out. And just a few lines later, back in the game. This isn't a story about miraculous healing. It's the perspective of someone who counts not bones, but costs. Another folder, another fund, and once again, the familiar logic. Another gladiator, another name, another school. But the same dry triggers. Damaged, unfit, written off. Nowhere in the text is there any mention of compassion, regret, or attempts to save a life. It simply reflects a flow. Someone arrives, does their job, and then disappears. The body is seen as a resource that can still be used, or maybe it can't. This is the main blow to the usual narrative. We often hear stories about cruel masters and unfortunate slaves, framed as personal dramas. But the documents tell a different story. This isn't personal. This is the norm. It's not just one brutal lanista. It's the common language of a state, an empire, a vast system that has learned to measure everything in terms of profit and loss. When ancient writers describe Spartacus, they already know how it all ends. It's easy for them to paint him as either a wild barbarian or a nearly noble leader. But these folks were writing with hindsight. The archive that lay in dust had no idea it would one day be dissected word by word. There's no prophecy there. There's only reality. Another fighter. Another name added to the list. The line about his role in training others breaks an important myth. The myth that a gladiator is just a disposable fighter for one match. It shows that some were used in a much more strategic way. If someone survived, if they knew how to do it, they were grabbed with both hands. They were put in charge of training the newcomers. Not out of respect, but because it was profitable. One experienced gladiator can prepare a dozen fresh recruits. The numbers really speak for themselves. That's why it's so important for two different documents to match with the same name. You can brush it off as a coincidence once, maybe just a common name. But when the name, the time frame, and the school status all line up, the bigger picture makes it hard to ignore. This isn't a story about a rebel. We see the journey of a person who has been part of the machine for a long time, rather than its enemy. The archive doesn't show sympathy. It's neither on Spartacus's side nor against him. Yet, in this cold, almost inhuman precision, we uncover what really happened. There's no noble sport here, no romantic aura here. This is a meat factory where even the future leader of the uprising was initially seen as an expensive yet disposable resource. And the clearer this system of scattered records becomes, the more obvious it is that the legend of the glorious gladiator is just a convenient tale. Reality is much colder, and it's from this jagged, indifferent machine that an explosion will eventually emerge, one that Rome will struggle to understand for a long time. Another description of the same foundation offers a nearly identical phrasing. In one of the Roman archives, there's a line that sounds so dry it sends chills down your spine. There's no name of Spartacus written in golden letters. No grandiosity, no heroism. Just a brief note about a man listed in the gladiator school, along with a neat note about his role. Not just a fighter, teaching others. The document is written as if it's about an object in storage, not a living person. It notes that he has already completed training, that he has participated in battles, that he is fit to train newcomers. Not a word about him ever rising up, because at the time of recording, he's just a small part of a bigger entertainment and profit machine. What really matters is something else. In another document from the same fund, a nearly identical phrasing appears. The same name, the same school, the same approximate time frame. Two separate sources, which weren't meant to be part of the same story, suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle. They confirm that this person didn't just fight in the arena, but also trained others. This isn't a legend or a late invention by a writer. This is recorded by a scribe who had no idea that centuries later people would be analyzing his words syllable by syllable. This dry record shatters our usual image. We tend to think of gladiators as one-time fighters. They stepped out, battled, died, and the crowd cheered. That's it. But the archives tell a different story. If a gladiator survived, if he was strong enough, they wouldn't rush to throw him away. They turned him into a tool, a mentor for the new fighters. This isn't about respect or honor. It's all about strategy. The lanista invests in training. Every fighter has a price. They need the newcomers to last longer and not die too quickly, to keep the show going, to place bets not just once, but many times. One experienced fighter could teach a dozen or even more, those who would then die in his place. The paper doesn't record the hero's fate, but the economics of the bloody business. And this is where the coincidence of two documents becomes crucial. If it were just one mention, you could brush it off. You might think the name isn't that unique, maybe it's someone else. But when everything lines up, name, time, school, status, the room for imagination shrinks. We're not talking about a mythical Spartacus, but a very real person, recorded in an official list. The archive doesn't know what sympathy is. There isn't a single phrase about pain, fear, or humiliation. It's all about status, functions, and essentially, price. Yet it's in this coldness that you can truly feel the system's cruelty. Because if even the future leader of the uprising is seen in documents as just a resource, it's easy to imagine how the others were treated. Those who didn't survive. Those whose names never made it onto paper. These records undermine the beautiful stories of a noble duel. Gladiatorial fights in this light aren't about sport or honor. They're a production. It's a line where people are turned into entertainment. And if someone is tough enough to survive, they're put back to work to prepare the next batch. No romance here, just cold, hard calculations. The more closely you look at these lines, the clearer it becomes. Spartacus was a part of this machine for a long time. He trained those who would later be sent to the arena. He lived within a system that fed on their blood. The uprising didn't come out of nowhere. It grew right out of those reports, from those tables where a person is reduced to a function and an expense line. And that's where the harshest feeling comes in. When you realize that behind the calm note of training others lies a future rebellion, the text of the archive starts to resonate, like a spring that no one noticed at that moment. Rome still lives by its own rules, counting bodies and profits, and in one of its lists, there's already a person who will one day turn this system against itself. In another section of the inventory, there's another confirmed date match. In the same year, across different scrolls, one name keeps popping up, like a shadow that the system accidentally highlighted. In one document, he's listed as a trained gladiator. In another, dated almost the same, there's a different note. The same person, the same school, but his status has changed. He goes from being a fighter to someone who trains others. The Roman records don't explain why this happened, they simply note the fact. Now, this person not only steps into the arena, but also prepares new fighters for it. The dates match, the location matches, and the type of record matches. This is no longer just a flight of fancy. Historians love to argue, but in this case, there's not much room for debate. The archive doesn't tell a story. It lays out the facts. If it mentions the same name twice in the same context, we're not looking at a pretty image, but a real biography, compressed into dry lines. In Roman documents, there are a lot of repetitions, but you rarely see a combination like this: a specific school, a specific profile, a specific time frame. And every time, next to this name, there's the same status marker. Not a field slave, not a household servant, not a craftsman, a gladiator training others, the person who keeps the whole flow of bodies into the arena. To completely avoid coincidences, they look at extra details: which school, who the owner is, what contracts were in play during that time, and everything lines up again, just like the teeth of a gear. The names of the managers match those found in other sources. The city mentioned is the same. The time period is also the same, when gladiator schools were particularly active in recruiting people. The whole scene is built not on imagination, but on documented evidence. It creates a strange picture. We know about a person we've never heard of in real life, not through stories from descendants, but through accounting records. There isn't a single line about his character, his views, or how he spoke. But there are dry movements of status. First, he is trained. Then he becomes a trainer himself. And this step is especially important because it not only reveals a personal story, but also the inner workings of the system. If a gladiator is chosen to teach others, it means he has survived long enough. That means he was a valuable asset. They didn't just throw him into battle until he was worn out. They moved him to a better position so he could generate profit for a longer time. Every student he trained was already an investment. And this is also reflected on paper. Not only his status changes, but the expense structure does too. It's in these little details that the tough documentary nerve is hidden. We're not told directly, this person suffered, this person hated everything around them. But we see how they're moved from one cell to another, how a living being is turned into a functional unit, how they're transformed into a part of production, where the outcome is always the same: spectacle, blood, and applause. The matching dates across different sections of the archive undermine Rome's main justification. There's no spontaneity, no "it just happened." The system operates in a measured and deliberately cold manner. Today, he's on the list of those who are fighting. Tomorrow, he'll be on the list of those preparing new fighters. The day after tomorrow, his name might disappear completely, but the flow won't be interrupted. Someone else will take his place. That's why this coincidence in the roster is so important. It shows that the gladiator school isn't chaos, or just a random group of people. This is a well-tuned mechanism where every step is recorded, every status is noted, and every life is laid out in detail. In this mechanism, The name Spartacus emerges not as a legend, but as a working unit that the system has recognized and evaluated on its own. Then, in the same scrolls, even more unpleasant details emerge, not about names, but about the loss rate that Rome had already factored in. In another account of the archive, another match of information is noted. Rome didn't just kill people in the arena. They planned their deaths as if they were expendable resources. Look at how it looks on paper. A scroll, just a regular inventory list. Items, amounts, notes in the margins. No emotions. But in these lines, you can see what the official versions try to obscure. There's a gladiator school. There are expenses for food, for medical care, for weapons. And next to it is a section that completely breaks the image of honor and glory. It includes losses that are already accounted for, not just overall, but broken down by periods. How many fighters are expected to drop out over the season? Not by names, but by numbers, as if they were counting not people, but clay pots that are bound to break. And this is where things get really unpleasant. These numbers match up with other documents. One shows the expenses for funding the school. The other lists the expected number of casualties and serious injuries. And when you put these two lines together, it becomes clear. This isn't just chaos on the battlefield. It's a plan. For instance, it's the year when Spartacus shows up in the records. Around the same time, another section of the archive is adjusting the standards. They've added a clause that raises the number of slaves purchased for the school. And at the same time, there's a line that accounts for the natural loss of fighters. Year by year, season by season, cycle by cycle of games. The official story suggests that gladiatorial battles were like a lottery. Some died, some survived. The crowd cheered, and fate was decided right then and there. But the archives tell a different tale. The system already knew how much blood it needed and would stock up on people accordingly. Spartacus in these documents isn't a hero, nor an enemy of Rome, or a symbol of freedom. He's just a part of a planned line. One of those who are already counted in for a certain percentage of losses. That's where the usual myth breaks down. We're often told that the uprising started by chance.